Hello everybody, welcome to Master the NEC. My name is Paul and I'm your guest host today as we talk about the changes to the National Electrical Code for the 2014 edition. And we've previously done a part 1 of this, which gave a list of code-wide changes, and we went over a few changes that were early on in the process. But we also now are moving on to another series, which is the part 2, which we go into more changes in the NEC. So we want to pick that up. And so first thing we're going to do is we're going to go on and jump into some of the changes that are involved in Article 210. Now the first one we're going to look at is 210.8A7. Now if you take your code book and you look at it, A7 it says sinks, and then you see that grayed out area. It says sinks where receptacles are installed within 6 feet of the outside edge of the sink. Now, it used to give kind of an allowance to say, well, that didn't include the kitchen sink if it was in a kitchen, because the kitchen already had its requirements in 210.8A6 for kitchens, but that was the receptacles serving the countertop. It really didn't address the sink. So now in the 7, it's really going to encompass all of them in a dwelling unit. So it's all sinks. It's no longer within 6 feet of a wet bar sink. If it's a sink, then and a receptacle is within 6 feet of it, it's going to be GFCI protected. So that's kind of where we're at on that. So basically they removed the statement that used to say located in areas other than kitchens, like as if the receptacles within 6 feet of a sink in a kitchen wasn't important. All right, one thing to remember with this is that it covers all receptacles now within 6 feet of a sink. So if I have a kitchen sink, and I have a receptacle underneath, let's say it's using the option to plug in cord for a disposal, and that disposal is a 15 or 20 amp, 120 volt single phase receptacle, then what happens is if it's within 6 feet of that sink, which obviously it probably will be, then it has to be GFCI protected. Now obviously the debate can go on whether or not you can put the GFCI down there, because again GFCIs are required to be readily accessible. There's a camp that argues that, hey, if I open the cabinets up, obviously I can get to it. It's accessible. I don't know. If you open it up and there's somebody that's in their 60s or 70s, can they really get down and get in there effectively? I don't know. So, realistically, majority of the jurisdictions will say that's not considered readily accessible, and that's a general requirement in 210.8. So, your jurisdiction is going to have to make that call, but basically what we're trying to say is that receptacle has to be GFCI protected. Now, you can do it at the panel, you can do it somewhere else. If that's a dedicated circuit for that disposal, then you're probably going to have to either do a faceless on the top, or you're going to have to do a breaker in the panel or whatnot, but you've got to protect it because it's within 6 feet of the sink. And that would include any receptacles, even receptacles that might be on the back side of a counter. If you have like a peninsula or whatnot, if that's within 6 feet of the sink, then guess what? It's going to have to be GFCI protected. So again, this rule now includes garbage disposals. It's going to include receptacles behind refrigerators that are within 6 feet of a sink. They're not serving the countertop. They might be on the countertop circuit, but they're not serving the countertop at that point. So, it's but now if it's within 6 feet, guess what? Wet bars, all those things that normally were required before, they're all within 6 feet. They're going to require it. All right, let's move on. Let's see here. The next one we want to look at in 210 is 210.8A9. It's dwelling unit bathtubs or shower stalls. Now, this is a new addition to the 2014 NEC, so GFCI protection is now required where receptacles are installed within 6 feet of the outside edge of a dwelling unit, bathtub or shower stalls. Okay, so it's going to be required to have the GFCI protection. Bathtubs or shower stalls are not always located in areas that meet the definition of bathrooms, so you got to be careful with that. So I could have a bathroom, and a bathroom could have the sink and let's say a toilet, and that's considered a bathroom. But then another area that might be sealed off, you might just have this shower or bathtub. And then technically in that space, it wouldn't be considered, because of all of the fixtures that are there, it wouldn't be considered a bathroom. But there's still the same hazard there. Now, I'm not sure why you'd want any receptacles in that little room. But if you did, now if they're within 6 feet of the outside edge of the bathtub or a shower stall, threshold, then you're going to have GFCI protection on them. So, this is a good change. Okay, so this is a new addition to the 2014 NEC. And if you read it, and I'll read it exactly how it says it in the NEC, and again, if you got your code books, you might want to give it a look. It's 210.8A9. And it says, bathtubs and shower stalls, where receptacles are installed within 6 feet of the outside edge of the bathtub or shower stall, is going to require GFCI protection on those receptacles. And another change that took place for the 2014 in that area, which is 210.8A10, and that was now the requirement for GFCI in laundry areas. Now, in the past, it was within 6 feet if you had maybe a laundry sink or whatnot. Now, the sink is not a driving factor anymore for this requirement when it comes to laundry areas. So, for dwelling units, laundry areas now require GFCI protection for 125 volt single-phase 15 and 20 ampere receptacles. Again, it doesn't matter if there's a sink, and it doesn't matter the distance in that room. Okay, so again, that sink is no longer the driving factor. So GFCI protection for laundry addresses the increased shock hazards risks that are consistent with the normal requirements for GFCI protection within the NEC for receptacles, and again, just happens to be in close proximity to some type of water source. So at the end of the day, the washing machine, for example, if it's a 20 amp circuit to that washing machine for the laundry circuit, then it's going to, that receptacle is going to be GFCI protected. One interesting note, if you ever get stumped in the code when it comes to whether or not the code is talking about a branch circuit or whether or not it's talking about a device, you really just look at the language. For example, in this, when it's talking about the 210.8A10, since we're talking about the receptacle, it talks about it and it says now require GFCI protection for 125 volt single phase 15 and 20 amp receptacles. Obviously, you're going to plug things into it, so that's their concern. But you notice that it talks about 125 volt. Now, that's a rating on the receptacle, a NEMA rating, just like there's a 250 NEMA rating for a receptacle that would be a 240 volt application for maybe the circuit for that. So that's kind of your quick hints. For example, if you're looking at AFCI applications, it's usually having to do with the branch circuit. So it'll talk about the 120 volt 15 and 20 amp applications. And here they're talking about the 125 volts. So just remember that 125 is really focused on a device versus the branch circuit itself. Now I can protect that receptacle by a GFCI breaker, circuit breaker, because it is protecting the receptacle by the fact that it's upstream of it, or I can do so at the device itself. So that's just kind of things to keep you aware of. So again, remember the sink is no longer the driving force, and especially there's no such thing now as a wet bar or whatever. All sinks are required, but when a receptacle within 6 feet of all sinks requires GFCI protection. But when you're dealing with the laundry area, the sink is no longer the driving force. That's been removed. So no longer an issue about a laundry sink. It is going to be on all 15 and 20 amp receptacles that are located in a laundry area. So that's a change for 2014. Okay, so now let's jump on over into the B. I remember one time I got a call from somebody. I was working as the engineer 2 at the city of Richmond, Virginia. And I got a call, and a guy wanted to argue with me about some applications of the NEC. And the funny part is, for some reason, he didn't turn the page in the NEC, and he didn't know there was a B part to 210.8. There's an A for dwelling units, and there's a B for other than dwelling units. And for some reason, it was a commercial application, but he argued that since it wasn't listed in A, that it didn't apply, and it didn't need to have the GFCI protection. I don't even know what it was. But that was the funniest thing, because I told the guy, I said, you might want to turn the page. And he turned the page, and there was B. So it must have been how the page, how it fell out on the page. And he just was so embarrassed. It was funny. Yeah, we got to be good friends after that, but I remember that, and it was hilarious. Anyway, let's jump on over to B, 210.8B. Now, B is dealing with other than dwelling units. A is what you're dealing with dwelling units. So there was a change in 210.8B8 for GFCIs dealing with garages, service bays, and similar areas. GFCI protection required for all 125 volt single phase 15 and 20 amp receptacles installed in non-dwelling unit garages, service bays, and similar areas. Now again, this doesn't apply to vehicle exhibition halls or showrooms, whether it be a lawnmowers or power equipment or auto or RVs or whatnot. Dealer showrooms, this doesn't apply. But it does to all the service bays and service areas in the garages, whether it's major or minor and what have you. Now, the one key thing about this in 210.8 B8 was the phrase where electrical diagnostic equipment, electric hand tools, and portable lighting equipment are to be used was deleted, because in those areas that we're talking about in garages, service bays, and similar areas to that, in a lot of the commercial garages, there's things like engine block heaters, there's charging equipment, a lot of diagnostic equipment that kind of would have fell under the original rule. But there's so much other equipment in there that it's hard to just limit it to that area. There's so many things that these vehicles can be plugged into. So you kind of got to remove that, because that only limited to those applications. So that's what changed in the 2014 NEC. So basically not a huge change, except for it went to tell you that in those garages, service bays, and similar areas to those types of locations, other than exhibition halls and showrooms for vehicles and recreational vehicles and whatnot. So anything in garages, service bays, and similar areas to that are going to have GFCI protection on those 15 and 20 ampere receptacles. So that was the change for the 2014 NEC. The next change we're looking at is sparked a lot of debate, and I'm sure it may change a little bit for the 2017 NEC. In fact, I am on Code Making Panel 17, and I am more than sure that there is an attempt here to move this requirement that I'm getting ready to talk about up under 422 for appliances. But here we're looking at 210.8D, and that is for a dwelling unit kitchen dishwasher branch circuits. Okay, so it only applies to dwelling unit applications. I had somebody call me the other day and said that this apply to a commercial building that had a dishwasher that's maybe in a lunchroom or whatnot. And I said, no, it's not a dwelling unit, so it doesn't apply. I'm not sure why the hazard's not the same there, but currently it doesn't apply. Probably because they want you to use a commercial dishwasher in a commercial application like that. But again, these are just like lunchrooms. We have one at Encore, and it's just a regular dishwasher. So anyway, so 210.8D says GFCI protection now required for all outlets that supply dishwashers installed in dwelling units. Now when we say outlets, that applies to both the receptacle or if you hardwire it, because again, an outlet is a point where utilization of power is taken, okay, from the system. Okay, from that point, from an outlet box. Or you can have a receptacle in that outlet box, and of course the dishwasher, the code allows it to be plugged in through cord and plug. So either way, now that circuit has to be GFCI protected. Okay. Modern day electronic control dishwashers can experience of end-of-life failure that can result in increased hazards or risks of shock. This is what was lobbied by the manufacturers of dishwashers back when they lobbied to have this put in. And many people feel like we're picking up their slack. They should do something better or integrate GFCI into their products. And that is what's going to be allowed into 2017 for them to integrate it. But that's just going to be an option. They have the other choices, which is to do exactly what it says here to protect it with GFCI. So we're not really giving them a free break, but we're not requiring them to integrate anything about GFCI protection as well. So we haven't gotten to that level yet. I think that's what we wanted to do, or some people wanted to do, but it never got to that point yet. So GFCI protection, there's many ways you can do it. You can do a faceless GFCI at the top, and on the load side, feed down below to the dishwasher. You can do it at the breaker. You can do it cord and plug to a well, you really can't do a cord and plug to a receptacle in the cavity directly beside the dishwasher, because again, you got to get to that GFCI receptacle. So many would argue that's not readily accessible, as we've talked about that before. Some will argue it is. Some will argue it's not. I will argue that my 70 6-year-old mom is not going to crawl down on her hands and knees and go under there to reset a GFCI. So it's not real convenient. And if she can't get on her knees and hands and get under there because she's 76 years old, there's a good chance that she's not going to test that GFCI device every month like the manufacturers want them to. So I don't know. For all those arguments out there that it's considered readily accessible underneath the counter, obviously, you will think differently probably when you get in your 70s and 80s. You ain't going to be able to get down so easy. But that's a whole nother debate, and I don't want to get into that debate because that's opinions, and I don't want to talk opinions here. And I'm trying not to give my own opinion on that, so I'll move on. Next, let's look at some changes that took place in the most popular section of the National Electrical Code, the one that sparked so much debate that I seem like I'm the only one around the country that goes into these forums. I take that back. Brian Holland, the NEMA rep, also goes in there and really fights his due diligence and, for these AFCIs. But you guessed it, we're going to talk about AFCI protection, arc fault circuit interrupters. And you know what? I'm not even going to get into a personal debate whether or not I support them or against them. Let's just talk about them because you know what? Every time I bring up a supporting issue, somebody else comes up with something negative, and you know what? Whatever. Incidentally, I have them in my house, and I went out and purchased them. They were not given to me, and when I moved to Texas, I put them in my house because I believe in them, and that's as far as I'm going to go with that. Now, new provisions were added in 210.12 for AFCIs in 2014. Significantly was under 210.12, it says that they now have to be readily accessible. So that sounds real familiar. It's same as GFCIs. They're required to be readily accessible. So that was added in the 2014 edition of the NEC. Now it also expanded quite a bit in the structure. Expanded quite a bit in the 2014. A lot of additions here. 6 individual items when dealing with dwelling unit AFCI protection. We also have branch circuit extension and modification that expanded, and of course dormitory units got added as well. So there's quite a bit of change in here, and I don't know how detailed I will go on it, and I certainly won't try to explain all of the new items if I can help it. We'll see how it goes. So, again, AFCIs are required to be readily accessible so they can be tested on a 30-day basis. I do understand that UL 943 for GFCIs has now come out with a self-test mechanism. Now, I'm not sure on that self-test whether or not if it detects something's wrong with it that it will shut itself off. I don't know that. I'll be honest with you. I haven't read that standard. It's just came out, the change. But I do know that the manufacturers have stepped up to the plate and done a feature that will allow it to self-check itself, I guess, every month. Again, it's kind of pointless if it doesn't self-check and then shut off if there's something wrong. But I don't know. So I can't make a comment on that because I haven't read it. But it might be out there for you guys out there who are reading those. Get the latest UL 943 for GFCIs and see what the changes are. I have not looked at it, so I can't comment on that. Let's see here. What else? Again, readily accessible requirement for the AFCIs. That's something that's bought into it. Next, let's look at some of the other areas that changed in 210.12a for arc fault circuit interrupters. 2 new locations were added to the list that require AFCI protections. I know that's going to make the AFCI people real happy. It's the kitchens and laundry areas. So you have the GFCI requirements that have been expanded to the laundry area. Now you have the AFCI that's expanded to the kitchen and laundry area. And again, the kitchen, that's going to apply to the small appliance branch circuit. That's going to apply to the lighting, everything in there that's 15 and 20 amp, 125 volt applications, or in this case AFCI, so it's 120 for the branch circuit protection. So anyway, they added kitchens and they added laundry areas to the list. All right, it's an incremental step. We've been doing this since 1999 when it mandated it to come into the code in 2002. So over time, it has expanded through the years. Oh, incidentally, I did want to say something else. Hey, for all of you out there, for the home inspectors or whatnot, that would like a complete history of the changes to the GFCI requirements, and I'm not sure if AFCI is in there as well. I haven't looked, so I probably shouldn't mention it. But there is an NFPA document 73 that's available out there. Go out there and get it. I don't know if it's free. I know you can look at a free version on Nfpa, and it's kind of an inspector's checklist, if you will, but it also has a great history of the changes in a table format to show you when GFCI first came in and then how it's expanded in the NEC through the years. So that's a real neat table. So that NFPA 73, and you know what? To be honest with you, I didn't even know anything really about that document. It's not something that most jurisdictions will enforce, but I was reading on there, another NEC consultant, his name is Joe Tedesco, he posted something about it, and so I went and looked at it. So thanks, Joe, for posting that. I really never used it because, as inspectors, we did our own thing based on the NEC. But it's a neat document. It kind of gives some history in there, so that's pretty cool. It kind of mirrors 70, in other words, make references to 70, but it does give some history in there, and I like that. So that's available out there, so look for it. It's NFPA 73 for all you inspectors out there who want to know the history of GFCIs and whatnot. And again, I don't know how I got on that because I was on the AFCIs, but you know how that goes. All right, so what other change did we take place in here? So AFCI Protection, now they added the term, instead of just being outlets, it also added devices, which now includes switches, because that used to be the big debate, where you had outlets in a room, but it didn't apply to the switches. And if the switch controlled a luminaire that was outside of the room, let's say a floodlight, that the outlet was outside of the room and the circuit came in and just hit that switch in the room, then you could argue that it wasn't had to be part of the AFCI. There was the branch circuit in that room because the outlet was actually outside of the room. Well, we kind of fixed that now, and then it includes devices as well. So if you look at the NEC, the language on it is going to be, I'll pull down to where the language is here. It says dwelling units, all 120 volt, and there's another example, 120 volts, so it's talking about the branch circuit. It says all 120 volt, single phase, 15 to 20 amp branch circuit supplying outlets or devices installed in dwelling unit, kitchens, family rooms, dining rooms, on and on and on and on. So you see that was important to add that or devices in there as well. So we incorporate the switches in there and what have you. So that's a good change. All right, let's see what else we got to do on this change. Again, kitchens and laundry areas were added, so yes, it's going to apply. Oh, the other question I get is, can AFCI and GFCI be on the same branch circuit? Of course they can. Two different technologies. One doesn't interfere with the other, and so they're perfectly acceptable. And just to clear the air out there for those that might not familiar, when you see an AFCI device that says combination device, that doesn't mean it's a combination AFCI GFCI. That means it's a combination arc location, which means it's a combination device can detect a series arc and a parallel arc. So that's the combination of those two arcs. Has nothing to do with detecting AFCI and GFCI function. Okay. Now that AFCI might have a GFI function in there, and some might and some might not. It's not required by UL 1699, which is the AFCI standard, to have it in there, but some manufacturers do, and there's the big debate whether or not that would detect things like glowing connections or whatnot. Again, 1699 doesn't deal with glowing connections. It only deals with arcs. And okay, that's, again, I don't want to get into that debate because I can hear the people on the message boards now. Paul's talking about AFCIs again, so I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to talk about it. All right, so basically you're required to have AFCI protection now everywhere in the home except for garages, which is liable to come next, bathrooms, which is liable to come next, and you really don't have anything like basements is not required, although we could argue it might be a similar room or area to, I don't know, a rec room. Again, that's up to your local inspector, but I will tell you generally it's a basement is a basement. And if it's an unfinished basement, it's kind of hard for it to be anything like a recreation room or whatnot. So anyway, we'll let you go from there. But, I look for, there's nothing that will stop bathrooms from being included in it next time, next cycle. I don't even know if it's part of the 2017. I believe it might be. I'm honestly trying to stay away from looking at all of the changes for 17, except for the code panel that I serve on, so that I just want to wait until we get through the process. It makes it more fun for me. I know that if I was doing books and having to sell things, it's a matter of who's the first to get something out. But that's not my thing. I like to wait. I like to wait and see what they come up with. All right, so let's look at some other changes in here. I'm going to skip over a lot of these AFCI things because it really just added some of the terms or devices is really what got added into all of the requirements. So one new thing they got added, I guess we should talk about this one, is 210.14. Well, hold on. See if I can talk about the other one first. Give me a second. Yeah, let's go on and talk about the new one. All right, let's talk about 210.12a AFCI protection. Again, they added the or devices in there, but what was new here is we're talking about a listed branch circuit type AFCI back at the panel and having an OBC, which is basically an outlet branch circuit AFCI device, which is at the first receptacle. So this is going to permit you to do that, and I could do it in type NM cable. Wouldn't have to be in a MC or wouldn't have to be in a rigid. I could do that as long as I put a branch feeder type AFCI in the panel, and then I put an OBC at the first receptacle. All right, and it really didn't give you any. There's no. I'm just trying to see the benefit here. Yeah. If you do that, there's no distance limitation on the NM cable. This is item number 2. Okay, so basically you've got the branch circuit and feeder protection at the panel, and then you've got the OBC protection at the first receptacle. That's going to give you parallel and series downstream, a certain amount of series upstream, and of course you'll get some parallel applications as well upstream from that OBC. And then you'll get your branch circuit feeder. It's going to give you some series protection, and so together they work as a system, and that's an option. The next one was item 3. Then that one is new as well. It did add the or devices. Now this one allows you to put what's called a supplemental arc protection circuit breaker. Now I don't even know if they make those. But that's what it would allow you to have, a supplemental arc protection circuit breaker. And I think there's a huge debate on whether or not that's to be removed or not in the 2017 because of whether or not it's makeable or not. Yeah, I don't know. My last listening to the argument was that they didn't make them. But anyway, if they did, they would allow you to put that. It's called a supplemental arc protection circuit breaker in, and it has to be listed, so it would have to be a listed supplemental arc protection circuit breaker. You install that at the origin, and then you're going to have a limited length of, if you wanted to run type NM cable, which is your traditional non-metallic sheath cable, it allows you to have up to 50 feet of the 14 gauge or up to 70 feet of the 12 gauge. And it must be continuous from the panel to the actual first outlet. And then, of course, in that outlet, you've got to put an OBC, and it's an outlet type branch circuit AFCI device. And then that would protect downstream. Now, they are available on the market, so that was the other thing that people ask all the time. Do they make those devices? And they do. They're out. I think 2 manufacturers might have them out at this time. I know Leventon has one out. I think Pass and Seymour might have one out. And so that protects downstream. Eaton might even have one out. I don't know. Eaton owns Eagle. I don't know. I get lost in all those company ownerships. But they are available, so if I could find a listed supplemental arc protection circuit breaker, I could put it in. That's probably going to cost more than a regular feeder and branch circuit AFCI, so I'd probably go that route. Then I don't have that 70 feet or 50 feet limitation. But anyway, that's an option that you're allowed. There's 6 different options that are permitted in here. Let's see here. That one, and then number 4 allows for an item number 4 for 210.12a4 is a system combination type AFCI. Now this is another one that I just don't think is going to be out on the market. That's going to be there's going to be big arguments about this. Now basically what this says is a listed outlet branch circuit type AFCI installed at the first outlet in combination with a listed branch circuit overcurrent protecting device. And it has 4 limiting conditions. And they have to be identified as a system combination. That means the device has to play nice with the receptacle device. So the circuit breaker has to play nice, and that means they have to be listed in combination. Now that might be doable for a company that makes both, but I don't know how doable that is for a company that only makes the devices, like Leventon or whatnot. They have to work with Eaton or work with Schneider or somebody in order to do this. So, you know what? I think there's a big debate to try to remove this as well. I don't know. But I'm just saying it's got to be a system combination, and it's got to be listed as such. In other words, that means that you're going to have a device that's going to have information that says which specific circuit breakers can be used with it, that have been evaluated as a system. Good luck with that. All right, so that might happen. I don't know. And that's pretty much it as far as significant changes. In the item number 5 in 210.12a, they did add the word metal wireway and metal auxiliary gutter to the list of different types, for example, that you could run from a normal circuit breaker to a OBC. And it says, look, you can run it in RMC, IMC, EMT, MC cable, steel armored type AC cable. That don't make sense to me. If you can run type MC, obviously you can run steel or armor. I guess they're worried about the fact that the armor is an effective ground fault current path on the AC, so they want it to be the steel. I won't get into that, but that's, again, if you can do EMT, the armor on a aluminum type MC or AC, I won't get into that. All right, so then you have a metal wireways and you have metal auxiliary gutters are the new ones that were added to that. So there you go. There's some options for you. And then in item 6, which is a listed branch circuit, just a normal circuit breaker or fuse. And if you run the raceway in the concrete and you come out right at the device, good luck with that, because you have to come out right at the device. Because if you poke out of the concrete, then you'd have to change over to the requirement that it showed you earlier, which would have to be rigid or EMT or something else. But let's say you ran the whole branch circuit from the panel in concrete to the first outlet. Then that outlet would have to be an OBC type device. That's the AFCI outlet type. Then you could use a regular listed circuit breaker or fuse inside the panel. And then the code allows you to run metal or non-metallic conduit or tubing or type MC cable is encased in 2 inches of concrete for a portion of the branch circuit between the overcurrent protected device and the first outlet. Okay, so it's permitted to do that. Type MC cable, obviously that's going to be the PVC jacketed type MC cable, obviously. So when they say type MC cable, little misleading, but of course they can't put in there PVC jacketed MC cable, could they? That'd be too difficult, wouldn't it? All right, so anyway, there we go. And I didn't say that in a way that I like they should do that. I'm just saying that would kind of muddy it up, I guess. Because we all know that even PVC jacketed MC still has to meet the same requirements of UL 1569. It's just the fact that we PVC it so that it can be in a wet location or a damp location. Make sense? Okay. All right, so extensions. Let's move on to extensions. So in 2014, under 210.12b, extending branch circuit, the branch circuit extensions or modifications in dwelling units. Okay, so we're looking at B now. So that's extensions or modifications in dwelling units. All right, what changed here? Well, it looks like the exception is going to be beneficial to many people here. It says existing branch circuit conductors can be extended up to 6 feet without AFCI protection where no additional outlets or devices are installed for when modified or extended. So basically, this is great if I'm doing a service change and I'm moving and I'm using an old panel and now I'm putting and using that maybe as a junction box and now putting a new panel in near it. If it's not more than 6 feet and I didn't change and add any outlets, then basically it's allowing me to extend those branch circuits up to 6 feet without having to incorporate any AFCI changes. So that's real big because sometimes when you move that, people would argue and say that, well, when you moved it from point A to point B, you're basically extending those branch circuits. And if you modify those circuits, then it's going to require you to add the AFCI protection. And that's what it said in 210.12b. So this exception allows for that extension. Okay? So that is significant for a lot of people who are making service changes to turn around and have the inspections authority come in and say, you're moving you're moving the panel, I get it, or flipping it, or whatever you're doing. Now you've got to bring all this stuff up to AFCI. Now that would be nice to think of because I guess I support AFCIs, but in reality is that increases the hardship on the installation, and maybe that was just a panel was moved because they were upgrading something for safety concerns, and you're making it better than it was. There's no sense in mandating somebody change everything to AFCI devices if it wasn't required at the time it was originally installed. And in this case, it's giving you that grace of 6 feet to do so. So you technically are moving these branch circuits, extending them, but we're going to give you 6 feet as long as you don't add any additional outlets or any other devices on there. Now you go in there and you add an extra receptacle when you're doing that panel upgrade, or you add smoke alarms and put a new outlet in that room. Now you've changed it, and that, at least on that branch circuit, you're going to have to put AFCI protection. Okay. Let's see, extensions. Yeah, okay, let's move on. All right, so 210.12c, AFCI protection for dormitory units. So basically, we've been added now. It says all 120 volt single phase, 1520 amp branch circuit supplying outlets installed in dormitory unit, bedrooms, living room, hallways, closets, and similar rooms are now required to be provided with AFCI protection. And of course, I guess dormitory units don't have kitchens, or maybe they do. I don't know. I never stayed in a dormitory unit, so. But anyway, there's a list there of the areas that require that AFCI protection. Again, it's on the branch circuit because it says 120 volt application. And another thing is, I do know that I did a lot of work in dormitories. Back in the University of Virginia, when me and my brother had our electrical contracting business, we did a lot of work in these dormitories. And I tell you what, it was rough living looking. I mean, everything was done on the cheap, so they wanted everything put in EMT on the surface and add some receptacles here and do this all surface mounted, plug mold or whatnot. It really wasn't a total remodel job. A lot of times they were just trying to find out. I mean, half these places had only room to put a futon in it. And anyway, so these dormitory units do have the issue where people always plug in microwaves. They lay them on the floor. They got the cords that are running. They use extension cords everywhere. So they really should have the same level of protection that you would see in a normal dwelling unit. So that's why the 2014 has incorporated the requirements for AFCI protection in dormitory units. Okay, so that's a change that was added to the 2014 NEC. Okay, let's move on to another one in 210. Let's move on to 210.17, electric vehicle branch circuits. Now, let's get one thing straight. EV vehicles are on the rise. They're not going anywhere. You've got the Volt, the Leaf, the Tesla. I've got 3 Teslas, just in case you didn't know, because I really don't have no Teslas, and I don't even have a Volt, so whatever. I got a new truck. Incidentally, funny story. I got a new truck, and you guys that hate me out there will love this. I got a new truck, 2015 F-150, and I hadn't had it 2 months. Nice, pretty red one. And a kid in the neighborhood ran his bike into it and put a dent in the back quarter panel. And I'm going to leave that dent in there to remind me that there are kids riding around in our neighborhood. All right, so for all of you out there that said, "Hey, Paul, that serves you right," you whatever. You know those guys over on that forum love that I got my truck damaged. But I don't care. Kids will be kids. All right, so if I want to fix it, I'll fix it one day. All right, so I still got 5 years worth of payments on it, so who cares? All right, so 210.17, electric vehicle branch circuits. All right, so let's get something straight. This is not a requirement in the NEC to install a circuit for EV vehicles. What this one is saying that is if you do install a circuit for EV vehicles, that it has to be a dedicated circuit or a separate branch circuit with no other outlets on it specifically for the EV application. All right, and that's what you have to install it for. So basically, let's look at it here. It's outlets installed for the purpose of charging electric vehicles are required to be supplied by a separate branch circuit with no other outlets. So that's its sole purpose. A charging of EV vehicles with an existing 125 volt receptacle outlet will typically overload an existing 120 volt general purpose branch circuit. And that's true because there's going to be other things on it. So the problem is when you're constructing the home, you don't know what the end user is going to buy, right? You don't know what they're going to do. When they buy a EV vehicle and now they got the normal type 1 charging unit that plugs into a standard outlet, you don't know that. But what this is saying, it doesn't demand that you put this outlet in. What it's saying is that if you do put one in, its sole purpose is for charging, and that's what it says. And if we look at the NEC, and now let's look at 210.17, if you got your code books, let's just kind of give it a look. You know what? It's so quick that I just jumped over. Oh, incidentally, I'm using the electronic PDF version. I love it. Always have. Keeps it with me, whether it's on my iPad, on my phone, tablets. I got the code book with me no matter where I go. So if you give me a second, people call me all the time and say, "Paul, how do you know that code?" And I'm like, "Well, I got it on every device that I have. I even have one of those new phones called the LG Urbane, whatever it is. It's like a iWatch, but it's the Android version, the gold one. Oh, I love it. I even have it on that. I know, but it's too small to see, but I got it. All right, so 210.17, electric vehicle branch circuits. It says, this is what the code says, an outlet or outlets installed for the purpose of charging electric vehicles shall be supplied by a separate branch circuit. This circuit shall have no other outlets. And when it says no other outlets, it means no other outlets other than those designated for electric vehicle charging. Okay, so that, and of course, then it gives you an informational note which sends you back to 625.2 for the definition of what electric vehicle is, so you kind of know, because you have PEVs and all these different types of electric vehicles. Like the Leaf is 100% electric, and then which I'd never have. Sorry about that, Nissan. Just not sure I want to be tethered to a charge-only vehicle that won't give me but 100, 200 miles at the max. Anyway, I like the Volt though. But this is, you got to know that, if you want to know what an electric vehicle is, you go to 625 and it'll give you some definitions of electric vehicles. All right, so this is a requirement if you're going to put in a charging for electric vehicle, then it has to be a separate branch circuit. All right. Well, let's again, a lot of people confuse that with the requirement to have to put one in, and that's not what it says. As if you do, it has to be a separate branch circuit with no other outlets on it other than for EV vehicles. It doesn't say that you, in new construction, that you have to put one in. Obviously, if there's no EV vehicles going in the house, then you wouldn't put one in. I encourage planned communities that are going in now to think about running a receptacle just for the EV applications and putting it in the garage and labeling it as such as a selling bonus because EV vehicles aren't going anywhere. They're only expanding. And, of course, you don't want to be left on a lurch, keep tripping a circuit or something by plugging it into a regular 120 volt branch circuit there that might have who knows what else on that circuit. Okay, just a thought. You don't have to do it. Doesn't require it. That's enough on that. Okay, let's go on and jump up into the meat of 210. We have some what I think is a significant change that gets rid of a lot of debate. in 210.52E1 and E2. Now, basically, get your code books out because we want to go look at this on 210.52 because I want to show you what's significant in this and how it kind of clears up some confusion in previous cycles about what it actually was saying. So if you look at E1, you'll notice if you got your code, you'll see grayed out area. It says that for 1 and 2 family dwellings in each unit of a 2-family dwelling that is at grade level, at least one receptacle outlet readily accessible from grade and not more than 6.5 feet above grade level shall be installed at the front and back of each dwelling unit. Now, basically, this is even permitting you to use the porch as grade, whereas before it used to say stuff like while standing at grade level, which made it more difficult. You couldn't use a receptacle on the porch because they were standing at grade level if you couldn't reach the receptacle that's on the porch. Didn't really make sense. So even the deck or porch is permitted to serve as grade. It's attached to grade, and you have to enter it to go into the dwelling, so it makes sense. You can agree to disagree, but that's what it's trying to say, because it removed that readily accessible from grade. Okay? It removed the while standing at grade level. It removed that portion of it, and now just says readily accessible from grade. So that means the porch or deck can be served that purpose. So the term readily accessible from grade is important because now if I have the requirements to have a receptacle at the front and the back of a structure, or if I have to have a receptacle within 25 feet of an air conditioning unit in that application, whereas we fall into that one all the time, where people are issuing saying, well, can I use the requirement of 210.63, the receptacle that's required within 25 feet? Can I use the one that's on the back porch? Then, yeah, surely if that receptacle is within 25 feet, you can do it. But also when you're out there for units and you're sitting there beside a porch, and the way the language said before, that certain receptacle that was on the porch might not be able to serve it because it's not accessible from grade level. And now that's totally been removed. So that makes it easier to understand. So the change will allow a deck or porch receptacle to serve as one of the required outlet receptacles from its readily accessible from grade. That means it's from the deck or the porch. It doesn't matter. And the same revision to individual, that's easy for me to say with only one cup of coffee. Same revisions for individual units in multifamily dwellings as well. So that change took place. Now let's look at the 210.52E3, balconies, decks, and porches. So this is changed over the years, where you didn't have to have a receptacle on the balcony, then you had to have one on the balcony, and all that time. So what it says the requirements for the receptacle located on balconies, decks, and porches has been revised to require the balcony, deck, or porch to be attached to the dwelling. Okay, so there's many people who argue that if the porch, deck, or balcony was not attached to the dwelling, did this apply? So it made it clear that it has to attach to the dwelling. And it also requires that the outdoor receptacle outlet be installed within the perimeter of the balcony, deck, or porch. That part was eliminated. Okay, so the within the perimeter part was eliminated. And again, the detached types of decks or porches, they really don't pose the same threat of extension cords because they're detached. They're not run through the doorway or whatnot as you would get with an attached type of deck or porch. So if you go back and look at the NEC, and we go back and we look at that, and oops, let me a second while I go back, and it's E3. And here you go, E3. If you read it, it says balconies, decks, and porches, balcony, decks, and porches that are attached to the dwelling unit. So that's significant because I've heard many debates over the years about if the porch was physically attached to the structure or not. Did it the same rule? Now we have pretty clear that if it's attached to it, then it does. If it's not attached to it, it doesn't. And it says and accessible from inside the dwelling unit shall have at least one receptacle outlet accessible from the balcony, deck, or porch. Okay? So it's got to be accessible. It didn't say it has to be within the perimeter. It just says it has to be accessible now. It says the receptacle outlet shall not be located more than 6.5 feet above the balcony, deck, or porch walking surface. Okay? So we just have some additional clarity to the balcony, decks, and porch requirement for the receptacles out there. Okay? So if it's a attached balcony, deck, or porch, then it shall have at least one receptacle that has to be accessible from that balcony, deck, or porch. It doesn't have to be within the perimeter anymore, but it also can't be higher than 6.5 feet from the walking surface of that deck, balcony, or porch. So that makes better sense right there. And the reason for that is there was a lot of times you might have a receptacle that was just outside of the perimeter of the deck, yet you could get through and get to it easily through the railings or reaching over the railing. It wasn't a big concern. And so that's why that came about. All right. So that is a change in the 2014 under 210.52E3 that you need to be aware of. Okay. So the next change we're going to look at, we're kind of staying in 210 here. We're going to look at 210.52G. Deals with basements, garages, and accessory buildings. All right. So there were some changes here that we need to be aware of. It created a list format, so now you've got G1, G2, and G3, G1 being garages, G2 being accessory buildings, and then G3 being basements. Okay. Now, one important thing that really took place in the 2014 that's currently a lot of people debate about it is the branch circuit that supplies the garage receptacles can only supply the garage. Okay, it's got to stay within the garage. Now let's go and look at that in the NEC so we can read that language. That's 210.52G1. So get your code books out here. It says, for garages, okay, it says, in each attached garage and in each detached garage with electric power, the branch circuit supplying this receptacle with an S, shall not supply outlets outside of the garage. Now that doesn't mean that receptacle can't supply the lighting outlets that are in that garage. But basically what it's saying is it has to stay within that garage. To me, this totally makes absolutely no sense at all. So I've got to run a whole separate branch circuit to supply maybe 2 lights that are outside of the garage doors that have to illuminate those doors, but they can't be on that circuit. Okay, I get it. That's what it's saying. But I could supply it from the lighting outlets as long as that lighting outlets weren't also on with the receptacles and I had a branch circuit just for the lighting in the garage, then I could go over and pick it up. So that makes more sense for me to run the circuits and leave the garage receptacles on their own circuit. That's what I get it now. Okay, that works for me. And it says at least one receptacle outlet shall be installed for each car space. Now, that doesn't apply if you have a truck, or it doesn't apply if you put an RV vehicle in there. It only applies to car spaces. So heads up, that gets changed in the 2017 code. But if you haven't even adopted the 2014 NEC yet, and it says each car space, yeah. Look for those arguments when somebody says, hey, I bought a truck. Anyway, it shouldn't be an argument. And that is getting changed. And this is a good example of when you can look to the later code and for guidance. And you'll see, especially the ROPs and ROCs, or in this case, the PIs and the PCs, public inputs and public comments, and see that this got fixed. And it did. And this was one of my proposals. It's vehicle spaces now rather than car spaces. But in the 2014, it says car spaces right now. All right, so that was that change that took place. And then the whole reason here for the argument, one of the arguments for these branch circuits supplying garage receptacles and not to supply anything outside of the garage was to try to understand the fact that, yeah, you don't know that people are going to put EV vehicles or plug-in hybrids or PEVs, as we call it, PHEVs, You have electric vehicles, and then you have plug-in hybrid type of electric vehicles that maybe run on gas or fossil fuels and electric. Like that's what the Volt is. And so if you limit it to those, then the chances are if you were to get an EV vehicle and you plugged it into it, less chance of causing any issues, I guess, for the circuit. So they're trying to protect you that way as well. That's the only real valid argument that they can make on that, I guess. But because, if you know you're going to have an EV circuit in there, then you got to meet 210.17. So this is like, well, we're going to cover the people that don't know that. And that's why we're going to have a separate receptacle for each space. And that's why we're going to say the receptacles can only supply those in the garage or outlets in the garage. So you get where I'm going with that? So now they feel like by doing this, it also allows you to potentially plug in one of those class 1 type EVs in there and not have an issue. Because you don't know what people are going to buy. Heck, I could go out here and buy an EV vehicle right now since my truck's all dented up. All right, so let's move on. And incidentally, if it's a 3-car garage, then you have to have 3 receptacles in there. Now, it doesn't necessarily say how you have to install those receptacles. It just says you have to have the receptacle for each vehicle, or I guess car space. So if I have a 3-car space, then I have to have 3 receptacles. I guess if you were to gang 2 duplexes there, I could have a 4-car garage and I'd be compliant, right? Anyway, I think we're going to try to define the spaces so that you place the receptacles properly, but I don't know if that's going to make it. I didn't look into 2017 to see. I know it was part of proposals to try to define how far it could be, but it's really hard to define out the actual vehicle space, So anyway, just so you know, that was the change for the garage and dealing with the circuits in a garage. Again, I think it's foolish to say that I couldn't pick up some lights that are just outside of the garage, but I guess if you're trying to protect the integrity of the potential EV vehicle that's in there, maybe it makes sense, because we know that luminaires are a fixed load, and you have too many of those on there, that's going to account for a fixed load. Whereas a receptacle, you don't know what type of load you could put on there. So I guess that's the concept behind it. They won't say that, but I'm pretty sure that's what they were going for. Okay, let's look at another one in 210, and I'm not sure, but this might round out our 210. Yes, it does. It's 210.64, electrical service areas, and again, this is not applying to residential or 1 and 2 family dwellings, because they normally have receptacle spacing in accordance with 210.52 anyway, and there's going to be a receptacle close to the electric service area. So that's not that big of an issue. But what you did have in 210.64 was a new provision requiring a 125 volt single phase 15 or 20 ampere receptacle to be installed at the electrical service areas. Now, again, at least one 125 volt single phase 15 to 20 amp receptacle. Doesn't really matter which branch circuit it's fed off of, it appears. Of course, the obvious, you can't have it off the kitchens and dedicated circuits. Yeah, you get the drift. I don't need to go there, but maybe I have this as services in the in an area, and I have a circuit near, and I just would extend it over to give me this receptacle. And this receptacle has to be a 125 volt receptacle, single phase, and it's a 15 to 20 amp receptacle or 20 amp receptacle, and it needs to be installed within 50 feet of all electrical service areas. Now this is intriguing to me because the standard extension cord, I guess, is a 25 foot, and that's what we have in 210.63. Yet we're going to up it and require it to be within 50 feet here for 210.64. So one smart change might be to either increase the one in 210.63 up to 50, which used to be for the HVAC industry, or we take this one, 210.64, and we drop it down to 25 feet, which is the standard cord length. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say standard, because I guess you can buy them in 50s, 25s, 100s, or whatnot. But if you want to stay with harmony, that's what it is in 210.63. It's 25 feet. So why wouldn't you stay the same for this one? Service receptacle. Anyway, that's what's needed for 10 test equipment, whatever, if you're going to do some testing, monitoring. Sometimes you have some long-term monitoring equipment that you have to hook onto the commercial service application, because again, this doesn't apply to 1 and 2 family dwellings. So maybe there's some energy monitoring systems from the utility company that they'll have to plug in and have power to it or something. So it just makes sense to have a receptacle there for servicing of the application. So that's what that is. So the actual electric service area is going to be designated by the engineer or the designer, or maybe it's just the area where the equipment is. Basically, I think the footprint of the equipment, like the last disconnect on the left and maybe the last disconnect on the right in the grouping, it's got to be within 50 feet of that area. And that's the way I guess I would do it. So, interesting about that is that it doesn't say anything about indoors or outdoors. So this also would apply to outdoors commercial service applications as well. So there you go. Okay, and I don't think in 64, and let's look at it real quick while we're here, that it doesn't differentiate the two. It just says at least 125 volt single phase 1520 amp receptacle outlet shall be installed within 50 feet of the electrical service equipment. And again, the exception is for 1 and 2 family dwellings. So yes, indoor or outdoors, it doesn't matter. I need a receptacle. So man, this is big. In a big commercial building where all the electrical service area is in the back of the building, right? And then you have all these services, and then you have these feeders running out to the different spaces. Who's going to pay for this service? Who's going to pay for this receptacle? In other words, who's going to be charged for this? So generally, you're going to have some kind of house panel or some kind of building maintenance panel, whatever, because I know that one tenant's not going to pay for it. I'm not paying for that receptacle if it's my tenant space, Anyway, we'll let them figure that out. All right, but anyway, that's the requirement, and they're going to have to work that out. All right, so that takes us up through what I want to talk about in Article 210. So hopefully you enjoyed the show today and learned something. I hope you didn't mind my little funny anecdotes and my little funny comments and little quirks and whatever. Just trying to bring some enjoyment to the fact that you sat here and listened to a hour-long broadcast of me tell you about some national electrical code changes, and I do hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I hope you come back, because we're going to have part 3, which is going to go into Article 220 and go from there. Thanks again for listening. God bless.